Travelers, what's a destination that looked amazing online but was completely disappointing in person? Giza, Egypt. Absolutely horrible. Every single person there is corrupt, every customs officer, tour guide, police, hotel clerk, etc. The pyramids are crowded with tourists and are extremely underwhelming. You can literally see a McDonald's just a mile away. I'm so glad we were only there for 2 days and breathed a sigh of relief once we left. Oh, and if you're a woman, it's 10 times bad. You will be hit on, propositioned all the time. Huh. And to think the most brilliant of people who built the most complex structures and their predecessors are also the most basic of humans falling to the basest of human urges. Story 2. Aruba, a nice little sunny island that is ruined, and I do mean ruined, by the ridiculous amount of people trying to hawk you a timeshare. When we checked into our hotel, the receptionist invited us to a timeshare presentation. Once we got to our bedroom, our phone rang again. It was an invitation to a timeshare presentation. When we went into town, there's people on street corners stopping you and trying to sell you a timeshare. Got back to our hotel at about 9 p.m. Oh, look, someone at the door trying to sell us a timeshare. Going to a local restaurant for lunch and the waiter pitches us a timeshare. The thing I found really nasty and quite intimidating, to be honest, was that a lot of the people on street corners would try and force you into a waiting vehicle so you could be whisked off somewhere to spend several hours having a timeshare presentation directed at you. Oh yes, and when we returned home a week or two later, we got an information pack in the post from the hotel trying to sell us, yes, a timeshare. It's a lovely place, but we found the constant pitching of timeshares completely ruined our experience. Story 3. Oktoberfest, more specifically in Munich. Now, I'm not saying you won't have a good time, it's just that if you want to go to a place that feels like your state fairgrounds, if you will, dressed in 200 euro dirndls with a million other Americans swinging Sweet Caroline and getting intoxicated on 15 euro beers under a large tent with an oompa band while spending 20 euros and waiting an hour to ride the Ferris wheel, go right ahead. However, you'll get more of an authentic experience by going to a small town Volksfest. It's less crowded, you can meet local Germans, and you'll spend half as much for a chicken, a beer, and all the Eins Prosit, Sweet Caroline, Country Roads, and that Robbie Williams song, Angels, that they all love to sing to when they're intoxicated. It's half the price, less crowded, and way more fun. Story 4. Marrakesh, Morocco. We stayed in the Medina, and that was probably our first mistake. As soon as we opened the door of our riad, we were constantly ambushed by people aggressively trying to sell us things or scam us. People would follow us around for ages trying to sell things we didn't want, and they weren't shy about grabbing us and trying to pull us in whatever direction. Add to that the people who would give us directions but were expecting us to pay them for their quote-unquote help that we never asked for. We were there as 4 girls, and I guess we kind of expected the men to be inappropriate and touchy, but we weren't really prepared for how grabby and pushy they were. The son of the riad owner had to start coming out with us every single time we wanted to leave because it was getting bad, and one guy even tried to fight his way into the riad to get to my friend. To be fair, when the police were around and saw things, they would chase the men away regardless of what they were doing, but of course they can't be everywhere all the time. Add to that, the locals would use racially charged language toward us a fair bit, and we all ended up with food poisoning despite being super careful and all of us having African and Asian backgrounds. I probably wouldn't return. Story 5. It's not what people traditionally think of as a destination, but that's part of the shame, as it really is the destination. Cruise ships. They reel you in with bait and switch prices and promise to visit so many ports of call. But the price is listed as per person per day, and it's lacking in all the nickel and diming they'll do. The time in port is so ridiculously short that you can't really enjoy the location before it's time to race back to the ship so they don't leave you. If you're not going on a cruise with the idea that the boat itself is the destination, you're making a mistake. I could go on and on, including the horrific labor practices and such, but that's enough. My wife has dragged me on too now. I'm not a big fan. Story 6. This is going to be a hot take, but it's very time-specific. The Swiss Alps, specifically the Lauterbrunnen Valley and the surrounding towns in July and August. The area is absolutely mobbed with people. You will not be alone in nature at any time, and you'll be constantly shoved and packed into cable cars like sardines. It feels like some of the most beautiful scenery in the world has been turned into a Disney World-type tourist attraction. I can't imagine how difficult summer must be for the locals. We would love to return in the fall and try again, but it was a difficult experience in July. Story 7. I'd like to give a bit of a different answer to this question. I was trying to think of a destination I was completely disappointed in and couldn't really come up with one. I do have a place I used to feel this way about, but my perspective has totally changed. If you asked me 10 years ago, my answer would have been Memphis. I'd just come back from my first trip to New Orleans and was really missing the city. I had plans to visit a friend in Tennessee, and everyone told me to stop in Memphis because it's so similar to New Orleans. I was very disappointed because I felt it was nothing like New Orleans and also felt a bit unsafe at the time. I did visit the National Civil Rights Museum and Sun Studio, which were highlights of the trip, but as for the city itself, I felt like I never had to go back again. Fast forward to last year, I had to go down to Memphis for a work trip, and honestly, I had an absolute blast. Taking Memphis for what it is, its own city, and not comparing it to another trip, I absolutely loved it. The food was amazing. I highly recommend a food tour. I got to learn a lot about the history of the city from the food tour alone. Then, of course, you have the music, the people, and this awesome, funky vibe I haven't found anywhere else. I know the crime rates are still high, but just like anywhere, be aware of your surroundings and don't be reckless, and you will be fine. I'd totally return to Memphis again. I think the lesson here is to manage your expectations while visiting somewhere new and to embrace the place for what it actually is and not what you expected it to be. Story 8. Goa, India, the streets are covered in cow crap, taxis massively overcharged, and they have deals with the local hotels and restaurants, so they're basically your only option unless you rent a scooter. Locals weren't very welcoming either. Market vendors were super aggressive and kept following me around for 10 to 15 minutes even after I kept saying no. The scams don't stop with the taxis either. At one point, a guy trailed me trying to clear my ears with sharp metal tools. Even though we stayed at a 5-star hotel and only ate there, I ended up horribly sick and lost 15 pounds in 3 days. When the doctors and nurses finally showed up, they came barefoot in flip-flops and didn't even wear gloves. Story 9. I've lived in Rome. I think it's an amazing place to visit and a great place to live, as long as you know what to expect. I say this with no disrespect to Italians. Many people who moved to Rome had a hard time because their expectations were pretty different. This doesn't apply to people visiting for a short period of time, but for those considering moving there. The expectation is often a, quote, European lifestyle, but with pizza and pasta. Clean, well-functioning institutions with order and precision, like Germany. In my experience, the reality is more of a Mediterranean lifestyle. Look at other Mediterranean cultures like Greece, North Africa, coastal Spain, and Turkey. They're often a bit more laid back and rules are more like guidelines. The running of daily life can be more chaotic. It's wonderful once you accept that you're not in Austria or Sweden. The further south you go, the more this seems true. In Rome, you'll see SPQR all around. There's a joke that it stands for Sono pazzi questi Romani. They're crazy, these Romans. Story 10. I know I'm going to be an outlier in this, but I will say New Zealand, don't get me wrong, the country is stunning and the nature is beautiful, but it's expensive, which explains why so many Kiwis are moving to Australia, and the amount of racism I've experienced or witnessed there is something I never experienced before in my life. I'm not the only black person who has mentioned this, but usually when someone does bring it up, they're met with hostility and accused of lying. I made a video about my experience on TikTok a year ago, and to this day, I still get occasional DMs from angry Kiwis saying all kinds of racist things to me. It is a beautiful country with some of the most breathtaking nature, and I did run into kind souls there, but I would never step foot in that country again. Story 11. India. Sorry, but you see images of the Taj Mahal, Jaipur, and the Punjab, and you see images of farmers working their fields as you pass by in a train with sitar music playing in your head. And then you get there, the abject poverty, the heat, the humidity, garbage everywhere, and emaciated women thrusting their even more emaciated babies into your arms. It's very, very hard to watch and see. Second to that would be Jamaica. Unfortunately, the crime and gang violence have really done damage to the country. You go to these walled resorts to stuff yourself and basically see nothing of the country. Story 12. For me, it was Marrakesh. It honestly looked like a place worth visiting, but it was just a horrible experience all around for us. Now, your mileage may vary, and I'm sure some people have a great time. Truth be told, there were some nice moments. However, the online description is, quote, the Marrakesh Medina is a vibrant and fascinating maze full of colors, scents, and history. Well, I don't know. I found it fairly bland in colors, incredibly dirty, it reeked, and people were constantly catcalling and scamming. That said, it wasn't all bad. The YSL house was nice, and visiting Comptoir d'Arna was a pretty cool experience. The best part of the trip, however, was the flight home. Story 13. Vegas. Naive me thought it was like the movies, bright and fun, hot but beautiful, with pool parties full of people drinking and laughing. It was harder than hell. Every person on the street was trying to sell you something or take a picture with you so you'd pay them. There were practically men and women everywhere who had been inappropriate, tourist sand vendors. I guess that part was just like the movies, lol. The pools were packed to the point you couldn't move, and every single one had beer and cigarettes floating in it. The water looked filthy. The casinos all smelled like cigarettes or grass, and the nightclubs were so expensive and packed it was painful to even go in. The best thing we did was leave the strip and go to Red Rock Canyon and some museums. We ended up just hanging by my friend's pool about 40 minutes away from the strip for 3 days and had a blast. Like I said, I'm naive and didn't realize this is how Vegas really is. I know it's someone's cup of tea, but it sure isn't mine. I thought I'd have fun and be able to let loose, but the whole trip felt like such a dangerous situation. It's a shame because I wanted to love it. Story 14. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It's the holiest place in Christendom, but when I went there a decade ago, it was dark and depressing and full of nuns with sharp elbows. Every significant site has 6 variations of the same thing, like 6 pendant lamps, because there's a millennium-old fight about who should control it. The last 3 stations of the cross were up some steep stairs, and there's a police-type barrier in front of it. Plus, a priest was clapping at people to leave after they had knelt for a few seconds. I don't bat for any religious team, so I was more bemused than disappointed, but St. Peter's in Rome is a far superior experience. Story 15. I went to Turkey after getting a good deal on tickets and a hotel. When I went, the exchange rate was so good it felt like I was robbing them. Everything was cheap. The taxis, food, souvenirs, rentals, and events were all like a quarter of what they would cost where I live. And this was just in Istanbul. When I went to Ankara, it was even cheaper. Sadly, though, all of the above were trash quality. The taxis smelled like they doubled as a toilet, and the drivers went out of their way to be rude. And if you go, make sure you have Google Maps running so they don't take you the long way around. The food was atrocious. It was all lean, overcooked beef, stewed veggies, or dried chicken. This is excluding desserts and pastries, which is the only thing people would recommend. The kebabs are all leathery, mystery meat, or overcooked beef with a side of 2-day-old salad. The souvenirs were all made in China and looked tacky and cheap every event, like I was being rushed to the end of it, and street scammers with birds, snakes, and bracelets are very common. Then there are the people. They were rude with clicking tongues and exasperated sighs as soon as they figured out you're a tourist. I honestly felt like they all hated their lives. I don't think please and thank you exist in the Turkish language. All in all, I would not recommend going for a city or tour trip. If you must go, then go to a private beach resort and just eat desserts and pastries for the entire trip. Story 16. I just came back from Amsterdam. Maybe it was the worst time of the year, also due to the Sail Amsterdam boat race being held while I was there. But for the first time, I experienced over-tourism and its fatigue. The city felt like a huge tourist trap. It was basically what Copenhagen would be if the entire city were run as Christiania. It was difficult to find a place to eat proper food and not touristy crap. Eventually, I found a nice, cozy Dutch restaurant. Everything was crowded with loud and obnoxious tourists acting like a flock of sheep. Even the nice places were hard to enjoy due to people coming from every angle, ruining not only the typical picture but also the general enjoyment of the site. Oh, and there were crazy people on bikes everywhere. It was much more likely to get injured by some insane person thinking they're at the Amstel Gold Race than by a car, not that traffic wasn't congested in the suburbs. At least the Rijksmuseum and the Van Gogh Museum were fine and vaguely quote-unquote usable. I wish I could say the same about the windmills in Zaanse Schans. My rating is 4 out of 10. I must visit again in the low season. Story 17. Myrtle Beach. I thought I was paying for a nice resort and ended up getting a dirty, shabby dump. The boardwalk was extremely underwhelming as well. Salem, Massachusetts. I went in November, so it wasn't crazy crowded, but all the shops open late and close by 5 p.m., and there's nothing to do afterward. Philadelphia. This city is a nightmare to drive in, and parking is wild. The Liberty Bell was also underwhelming. We walked through a maze to get to it, and we're like, that's it? I guess I don't know what we were expecting? Love Park would be nice if people wouldn't approach you to pay them to take your photo. The art museum stairs are always swamped, but the Mutter Museum was really cool though. Niagara Falls? This place is gross. Inside the actual state park is nice, but the area around it is awful and run down. Story 18. I can only think of 2 that stand out. The Hollywood Walk of Fame. The first time we ever went, I was sure the GPS must have sent me to the wrong place, but then we saw the stars. It was a strange gap in expectation versus reality. Ensenada, Mexico. It was a cruise stop, of course. I didn't know anything about it. We got off, went past the heavily armed officers, and spent the afternoon walking through peddlers and being heckled. We've looked at other cruises that stop there as well and agreed that next time we just won't get off the boat. It very well could be different if you explore further, but if you think you're getting off a cruise to a tropical beach location, nope. Story 19. I've been a truck driver for 10 years, so I travel for work, but I think this applies. Los Angeles, California. I grew up with movies about how pretty and clean it was. The reality? Traffic from 4 a.m. until noon, then it starts again at 2 p.m. until around 10 p.m. There's trash in the ditches and dust and dirt everywhere. Once when I first started driving and had my trainer with me, we went down by the intermodal train yard. We drove by what literally looked like a 10-foot high pile of fish. Las Vegas, Nevada, it's very dusty and dirty. Lots of the industrial areas were not planned out properly. And some of my most interesting deliveries, backing my 75-foot-long truck into dock doors, happened there. Plus, if you're driving straight through on I-15, it takes only about an hour. It's a wide city, not a long one. The downtown area is also bright as can be at night, and I just never like that kind of thing. Baltimore, Maryland, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, they're both the same, crowded with small areas and rude and disrespectful people. I had one lady ask me in a very rude, condescending tone if I was from the area. Also, the Travel Centers of America, TA truck stop nearby, was the only place where some random man followed me through the parking lot and into the store and then tried to touch me inappropriately. Sure, the countryside around these cities is beautiful, but those places tarnish the natural beauty. Story 20. Phuket, Thailand was a huge letdown for me. I took a month off of work in late 2022 to backpack through Malaysia and Thailand. Phuket was going to be the highlight of the trip, and I planned to stay about a week to enjoy the island tours, then get scuba certification and enjoy the beach life. When I finally made it to Phuket, it took about 2 days for me to realize the scene wasn't for me. Grass had recently been legalized, and there were grass shops popping up everywhere, and the smell permeated the atmosphere. I couldn't enjoy a beer without getting hassled about having company and the resulting lady drinks. The vendors were relentless, traffic was horrible in and around Patong Beach, and there were smelly hipsters as far as the eye could see, crowded boats, etc. When I read that one of the islands I wanted to visit, PP, had strict beach rules, no swimming, that did it for me. I left after only 4 days instead of the planned week or longer. I found Phuket was not my jam with the crowds, high prices, and aggressive vendors. I do hear the resorts are nice, but I was traveling solo and purposely avoided resorts because I thought it would be putting me closer to the people I was visiting. Story 21. It's not the question, but since some of you are looking for places to avoid, please don't come to California just for LA or specifically Hollywood. The US has so much natural beauty and diverse geography. We have many of the world's largest lakes, massive national parks, and several world wonders. You can ski, surf, cave dive, bungee jump, climb mountains, or race dune buggies in the desert without even leaving California. You can enjoy city traffic and undesirable people at home. Come here and do something cool instead. Story 22. Cuba. I went there for my daughter's destination wedding. My daughter and her partner had scoped out the resort the year prior. It was an Iberostar, a brand at which we had stayed numerous times in Mexico, and they were always top-notch. Sometime between our initial trip and the actual wedding, the Cuban government passed a law that expatriate companies had to pay 50% of their revenue as a tax. This meant that they had $0 to reinvest into their properties in any way. With no maintenance or repairs, the place was in an absolute state of disrepair. Cuba as a whole was a major disappointment. On the bus ride into town, our so-called tour guide gave us a 1-minute Cuban history talk, then spent the next 45 minutes telling us why we should tip Cubans and suggesting that we exchange money with her for a more favorable exchange rate. Only later did we find out that she was robbing us blind on the exchange rate. I would never go there again, and I would never recommend anyone go there. Story 23. Israel. Not that I had seen great commercials for it, but we were visiting a few countries in the Middle East and thought, sure, let's go. In my experience, the people there were the most difficult, arrogant, and unpleasant I have ever met in my life. So much so that I insisted we cut this portion of our trip short, which received no objection from my travel partner. I've never met people who were more challenging in any of the 30 countries I have visited so far. Now, of course, we see the situation with the Palestinians, and I'm thinking, yeah, that pretty much aligns with my experience. The situation is appalling, but not surprising at all. And if any of these stories are getting to you, especially if you're coming from LA, LOL, then don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 24. Zanzibar. I was working in Dar es Salaam and had a couple of days to do something fun. My choices were Zanzibar or a photo safari. I remembered seeing an article in National Geographic about Zanzibar as a kid 30 years ago. Okay. And I was wowed by it, so I decided to go for it. It was a huge tourist trap without that many tourists, so I was a target with hawkers, the bracelet scam, and street beggars. I was so busy fighting people off, I barely got to look at anything I had come for. One of the few half-decent pictures I managed to take was of the plaque at the house where Freddie Mercury was born, which unfortunately was not open for tours. Story 25. Indonesia. I know many people had amazing experiences there, but I didn't. It wasn't beautiful at all. There was garbage everywhere, streets, the ocean, sidewalks, just everywhere. We went on a few disappointing tours. One was at a traditional home. Apparently the tour wasn't vetted or they just didn't care. The homeowners had several caged birds basically living on giant piles of their own excrement. It was sad. The other was just as bad, just a drive-by terraced gardens. The sandbals made it moderately better. Indonesia is a never again for me. Story 26. I just got back from Santorini. It's only as beautiful as the pictures in a very small area. The rest is basically a volcano mountain terrain with bungalows spread out everywhere other than the small strip of wow. Not to mention the tourists are herding through the narrow walkways one after another, making it anything but enjoyable. The most interesting thing on the ride there was seeing what they called resort housing, a nicer structure with clear blue water and a small pool surrounded by what looks like volcanic land. Imagine being sold by pictures of the nice accommodations only to arrive and find yourself in a sparse desert area with roads. One family was laid out by the pool in their yard, fully exposed to a somewhat busy roadway and nothing else. It was kind of funny. Mykonos was much nicer. I'm not a city person, and even Athens was better to visit. Story 27. While not completely disappointing, we went to Turks and Caicos for around 10 days for a honeymoon in 2018, and it wasn't as we had hoped. The beach and the bay themselves are beautiful, but it was difficult to get around to do anything else. We had scheduled to rent a car, but when we got there, they didn't have any available and gave us no explanation or timeline for when we could get one. The other islands were also tougher to access than we had anticipated. There just wasn't much to do in general, especially in the evening, except a casino, which we had no interest in. So we basically just stayed at the beach or our resort bar and pool 90% of the time. A couple of times we biked down into town, but the bikes were too old and big for my wife, so she couldn't make it far. I had a list of something like 10 to 12 things I wanted to do or try, and for various reasons, for example, unable to access, canceled, or too expensive, I only got to a few of them. In hindsight, I probably should have planned better or let my wife make an itinerary as she likes to do, but I didn't expect to have issues doing these things there since I had been to other Caribbean islands and never needed to. We also both agreed that given the lack of interesting things to do other than sit around, it would have been better if we had only been there for 5 or so days instead of 10. Story 28. On my way to Rome, a hotel-arranged limo, now I feel like the driver wanted to rob us but changed his mind for some reason, took us very off the path according to my GPS, which I had checked beforehand. I even remember a 3-point turn at one point and driving on dirt roads. Anyway, as we were getting close to Rome, all we saw were bars and spray-painted buildings everywhere, literally looking like the slums. I'm thinking, what on earth is happening right now? It looked like a rough area. I couldn't believe my eyes with how fast everything changed. It went from thinking, I want to stay in my hotel to watch movies for the week to, oh my gosh, look at that building, that one too, let's visit them all. It's just bizarre how quickly it flipped. Within a few blocks, it literally turned into what you see online and more. I do feel that some legendary seaside towns are very let down-ish. While there are some beautiful sights and the landscape can differ from place to place, the seaside town in this country was pretty much a replica of one in another country that was a 7-hour flight away. One just had more hills and different foods. Story 29. This one is going to be a hot take, but I lived in Oahu for 2 years. I love the culture, but I felt such overwhelming guilt for how poorly tourists treat the island. Litter, disrespectful to local customs, and stop trying to touch the wildlife, and how poorly the state cares for or lacks care for its own people and homeless population. The culture is choked out by the constant need to appeal to tourist and military presence. Roads aren't maintained, there is rampant theft, and Oahu is generally just so incredibly overcrowded it ends up feeling like every other big city. If you appreciate culture and want more of a separation from the touristy madness, I'd recommend the Big Island. Just do your research, be respectful of the local customs, and again, don't touch the wildlife. Story 30. The Maldives. We were there 3 years ago when the travel restrictions during COVID were lifted for the first time. It was an absolute disappointment. In our perception, the Maldives are the holiday destination of the rich and the beautiful with dream beaches, the best food, and happy, friendly people all around. The beaches, however, were mostly so rocky that walking barefoot was impossible. We've experienced much better elsewhere. The food was fine overall, but nothing special. Again, we've had better elsewhere. And the people were nice and friendly, but nothing outstanding. Also, something we've experienced better elsewhere. Perhaps it was our misfortune that after some time without tourists and income, we arrived on the island just as it was waking up from its Sleeping Beauty slumber. And much like Sleeping Beauty after her long sleep, at that moment, the island itself could have used a quick toothbrushing, a shower, and a shave of the armpits. Story 31. I've been in school and training for the last decade and haven't been on vacation much or at all. I went to Cancun, which I'd been to as a kid, and man, what a letdown. The beach was so rocky with waves that I almost injured myself going for a swim. The food was pretty bland outside the restaurants, which you need to reserve ahead of time and might not get a spot in, so you're left to eat random buffet trash. The pool was nice, but service was pretty limited, so I couldn't make use of the all-inclusive package all that much. I'm sure it varies from resort to resort. At the same time, we didn't exactly cheap out, and the experience was pretty subpar, but I could see how I enjoyed it as a kid. Story 32. Sapa, Vietnam. It's advertised online as this picturesque place full of local culture, authentic temples, and almost undiscovered foods. The reality is that it's incredibly touristy and not in a fun way. Keep in mind, we had to take a bus ride to get there from Hanoi, which took several hours. Most restaurants are overpriced for what they offer, and the place itself is basically just a few streets. There was one museum, but it was essentially not maintained and very small. There was also a church with nothing in it and a temple that was all right, but nothing to write home about. You're done with the place itself in like 2 hours maximum. In those 2 hours, you'll come across potholes and half-hearted construction work, and you cannot stand still for more than a minute without being pestered by persistent local vendors desperate for your money. I cannot express in words how frustrating it is to want to plan a route or find things to look at while visibly occupied, and random strangers ignore all that and basically start screaming in your ear. This happens all over Vietnam, but it is worse in Sao Pa. There's a local cat village nearby, which is literally just a village where people live, but it's been turned into a tourist attraction. Imagine living in the countryside and now you have to deal with hundreds of strangers daily walking through and cosplaying. They rent out costumes for some reason. The only positive thing is the cable car and the temple complex on the mountain nearby. They are very impressive sights, albeit still very touristy. That alone, however, is not worth a detour of 2 times 3 hours. It is crazy to imagine, but we had a better time in the obviously touristic beach cities, which at least had several museums and shops than in whatever that was. Story 33. Washington State? Sorta. I landed in Portland and did a big round circle, hitting the national parks. The national parks are amazing. Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens were super lovely. However, outside of the national parks, it was tough finding decent hotels. It is a 2.5 to 3 hour drive between Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier. You would think they would have something more than dodgy little travel lodges to sleep in. There were some sketchy places. All I wanted was a place that was safe, secure, and clean. The best I found was a couple of Holiday Inns, and even those were massively under construction of some kind or another, which is fine. Other than the national parks, it just doesn't seem set up for any kind of tourism. There were 1,000 Douglas firs on every corner, though. Story 34. Anywhere on an online influencer or tourism site is 95% guaranteed to be a total dud, and the other 5% is going to be pretty marginal. We've relented and split vacations to spend a couple of days out of our own plans to go to sites with friends that they feel compelled to visit from their social media fields. 100% duds to the max. They hated them also. They wonder why we go back to an area years later for another trip, and we had to remind them that our part of the trip without them was amazing, while the part of the trip they wanted to go see was awful. We are going to see more of the amazing people-free, undeveloped areas they didn't see time and time again. The world is full of amazing places and beauty if you know where not to look for it. Story 35. The Arashiyama Bamboo Grove. First, I will say I'm glad I went to see it, but everything else around it was better. We got there first thing in the morning before anyone else was really there. You will see online photos and Instagram posts of this dreamlike giant bamboo path. When you get there, it's a short paved path, maybe 100 to 200 feet long. The giant bamboo is neat and it's a nice photo op, but it's nothing to plan an entire day around. The rest of Arashiyama was beautiful, and I love visiting the ancient shrines, gardens, and cemeteries. We had the best pastry near the Moon Bridge. There were so many nice shops too, and I liked the bamboo. It was just underwhelming. Story 36. Colorado native here, the Four Corners Monument sucks. It's actually on a Native American reservation and run by the Navajo tribe, not the U.S. Parks Department. There are a lot of rules because you are on native land, which is okay, but one of the signs that sticks out to me warns that scattering ashes is against Navajo custom, but people still try to do it. You're in the middle of nowhere, and it's literally just a slab of concrete surrounded on all sides by gift shops. If you're down there by Durango, just go to Mesa Verde, which is a way better way to spend a day. Story 37. Niagara Falls. Too many people. The falls are kind of impressive, but it's hard to enjoy when you're crammed on that tiny barge tighter than sardines in a tin can. The Statue of Liberty. Take every film you've ever seen with the statue in it and scale her down by a factor of 2. She's shorter than you think. You get to the island, look up, and the first thing in your mind is, wait, that's it? Times Square. It's either so crowded it's pointless, or maybe there's so much traffic you can't really enjoy it anyway. Story 38. I have an answer for this with my 3 greatest disappointments in traveling. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia. It's all blue. Sunlight doesn't penetrate the water in its full range. I'm not 100% on the science, but I'm sure someone is. So all those bright colors are done with lights behind the camera. The Northern Lights in Iceland. These are all brown. Science again. I have amazing pictures of these incredible green lights, but in person, it was just all brown. Machu Picchu in Peru. For 3 days, I walked the Inca Trail. It was 3 very difficult days of hiking up and down mountains, my head giddy with the elevation changes. One girl even collapsed and had to be stretchered out. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, we saw the sunrise over the area. After we did one final walk down, we were confronted by the huge horde of people who had come on the bus. Give me an hour at least. I felt like I had been misled for 3 days and I'm not even in good shape. Story 39. India. I've been a handful of times. It looks pretty in pictures, but every time I get there, I'm like, why did I even come here? It's hot, it's overpopulated, there's a lot of poverty, and people do not respect your personal space at all. I get sick every time I go. Malaysia is a glorified version of India with a similar vibe. I like some of the islands for their natural beauty, but apart from that, there's nothing great about it. Singapore is very businessy and boring and extremely hot as well. I guess I'll never go to Egypt after this thread, lol. And in the US, Gatlinburg definitely sucks, and Helen, Georgia is a tourist trap. New Orleans is really dirty and smells terrible, and that's enough for me to dislike it. New York is just busy and crowded, but the food is pretty amazing. Story 40. This might be a weird one, but the Galapagos became tiring. Maybe it's because I was on a budget, but it felt like a lot of the locals didn't necessarily want me there, but since I was, they would try to take as much of my money as possible. The quote unquote tax was so real with made up prices even for groceries. What's more, for a place you would think would be organized, there are islands with almost no cell coverage and you can become trapped there. I almost was because the people I paid to book my ferry ride did not book it, and I was forced to take a plane between islands to avoid missing my live aboard. The whole ordeal felt like a scam based on how it played out. I probably could have handled parts of it better, but the whole place was kind of underwhelming compared to what you may expect. Story 41. India, crowded, heavily polluted, dirty. I'm not exaggerating when I say that sometimes you feel as though you are driving through an actual landfill and can't see the road through the trash. You can't drink the water because you'll get sick, and you can't eat the fresh food for the same reason. Paying for most things turns into a frustrating negotiation that can last for 30 minutes. You can't get anywhere yourself, so you have to hire a driver, and you are never sure if you're getting ripped off because the driver will suggest you go to places where his friends and family, etc. work. You constantly feel as though you are being manipulated in this way. Buildings are crumbling or half finished. If you're a woman, you can't go anywhere without a male. In my case, my husband, escort, especially after dark. Anyone who complains about the EPA hindering industry here in the States needs to visit so you can see what the other side looks like. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Story 42. The U.S. Virgin Islands. St. Thomas has Magens Bay Beach and Sapphire Beach, which are nice, but the rest of the beaches on the island were mid. Everyone living there seems to be a transplant from the States. We had 3 different bartenders and servers from Wisconsin. St. John was gorgeous though, but staying there takes a lot more effort and planning. Oh, and everything is closed if there isn't a cruise in. I wouldn't mind it as a cruise stop, but spending more than a handful of days there wasn't worth it. Story 43. A general comment on all the complaints about being constantly badgered to buy things at every tourist location. That's the purpose of tourists, to spend money. Nobody wants us otherwise. Do you want a bunch of strangers wandering around your neighborhood, gawking and getting in the way? Not unless they give you money, you don't. Being hounded to buy things is the norm, just expect it. Fancier places do it more subtly, poor places do it in your face, but it's the same. Story 44. Nottingham, England has good nightlife and a wonderful tram system. I really loved staying there back in 2006. Just be aware, however, Sherwood Forest is tiny. When the polite recorded voice on the tram says, "The forest," you see about 3 blocks of old woods. The park and ride lot next to it is clearly visible and bigger. This is what's left, more like Sherwood landscaping. Almost any tiny park with a couple of good trees would be more interesting. Robin Hood could have easily fought off the Royal Armies steaming down from the Tesco at the end of the line in Hucknall. The Tesco is huge. By contrast, Bath Spa is completely worth a day trip. Get up slightly early, catch a fast enough train out of Paddington or Reading after 9 a.m. so you pay less and spend the day. Even better, spend the night in Bristol. Get to the Roman Spa early and weigh yourself on the old scale at the platform as you head back. It's in stone and pounds or kilograms. It's like having 2 almost familiar planets nearby. I am 95 kilos, that's 14 stone, and then... Story 45. People are going to disagree with my 2, but here they are. Parisians are rude, everything is expensive, and there is such a social divide you can experience just by not speaking French. They seem to hate everyone there. The Eiffel Tower is surrounded by cellars and tourist traps. The Louvre is not so impressive if you've been to Italy and seen most of the exhibits in their natural surroundings and full-sized. Scotland, every town relies on tourism and there's really not much. Go see the Alps instead and you'll be better off than in the Highlands. There's an overpriced magnet for every village. The food is disappointing, but the people are nice. It rains every 2 hours and is sunny every 2 hours, which gives you just enough time to drive to the next village to wait for the rain to pass before sightseeing for another hour. Story 46. Sicily for me, the whole place was surprisingly run down. Some roads were so bad it looked like they'd been hit by an earthquake, with trash on the sides of the roads everywhere. Shops were pretty much all either extremely expensive or it was generic tourist stuff. I went to a variety of restaurants across the island and none of them were particularly good. Even the pizza was mostly fairly average. I would definitely recommend going to Spain or the mainland of Italy over Sicily. Sicily itself seems like it's in dire need of government money for garbage handling and industry expansion away from tourism. Story 47. Dubai. Some of it wasn't bad, but that was further away from the city. In the city, people could be so horrible to workers and animals. The outskirts were depressing and dirty, and it just felt unglamorous and touristy. I've been more than once, and it seems to get worse each time. Story 48. Sanya, China. China's Hawaii? Yeah, okay. The city itself is dirty even by developing country standards, but it's also very expensive, even much more so than Shanghai or Beijing, kinda like Hawaii. Most beaches aren't very clean either. The ones at the resorts are nice and clean, but you aren't allowed to swim at those beaches. They're mostly just for pictures, I guess. Not only would it be cheaper to go to any Southeast Asian country, but the beaches would be much better as well. I'm saying this as someone living in China. Story 49, Istanbul. I'd always wanted to go and see the historical buildings and take in the culture. History has been completely erased from a large number of buildings, including the Hagia Sophia, which was incredibly disappointing. People were at best dismissive and mostly very rude, which is at odds with all the Turks I know in England who are incredibly friendly. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks we're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.